So could you, while I'm just setting this up, Synth, Phonomics, could you introduce yourselves, what your backgrounds are? Make it short, make it brief.
Sure. I am Synth. You can find me on YouTube at youtube.com/SINTHE. I'm the in-house left-wing debater for a channel called The Crucible. You can check them out as well. That's about it for me. Phoenix, you want to plug yourself and tell your background?
Sure. I'm Twitch at twitch.tv/Phonomics, PHENLMAKS. I'm also on Twitter as Phonomics. And we do politics streams. I'm a trans girl, so we talk about trans stuff sometimes.
Great.
Yep.
And then Nuance, my friend. I guess you haven't really done an introduction. We just chatted, so.
Yeah, Nuance Pro across all the various platforms, YouTube primarily, make videos and stuff about politics.
All right, so what would the room like to start with? Would we like to start with the Don't Say Gay bill or transgenderism in sports? I'll give that to the floor for a sec.
I guess in the order that it's written, we could just start with transgenderism in sports.
Right, okay, so Nuance, I'm going to give you, actually, you know what, this is a right-wing channel, so I'll give the other side. This is really probably going to be Nuance and I versing you two. I don't really see that going any other way on this conversation. So, Synth, Phonomics, if you want to give a quick 1-minute take on your opinions on transgenderism in sports, and then Nuance and I will jump in with our takes, and then the floor will be open.
Really quickly, Lauren, could you also cam up?
Yeah, I can put on my virtual cam. Just give me a second here.
Okay.
All right. I guess in the meantime, I'll just go ahead and give my quick 1-minute spiel. In the case of trans people in sports, I think it makes perfect sense to keep I guess the standard of allowing women, regardless of their background in sports. I don't think it makes much sense to push trans women out of sports. I think the fairness argument doesn't make much sense logically, and the argument of social consequences doesn't make much sense either, given the sort of like the lack of any negative social consequence so far. I think that we've seen what happens when you allow trans women in sports, and it's just nothing bad seems to happen. So I don't see any reason why we change the policies we have now and push them out of it entirely. It seems like a strange standard to set. If you want to go ahead and give a quick 1 minute as well.
Right. Oh, sorry. Quick second. I'm sorry.
Sure.
My cam isn't. I've tried to turn on my virtual cam, but it's not working for some reason. Is that all right, Phonomics? I apologize.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. So, Phonomics, your thoughts?
Sure. I think that broadly transgender integration in sports is a good thing. I think that it solidifies the societal message that trans women are women and trans men are men. Personally, I know I know multiple trans men who have quit sports because they had to compete in the women's league as opposed to the men's league. And I obviously know that the same problems can occur in trans women. And I know that this year going into what might be my senior track and sports season, there's a lot of question into which one I'll actually be going into, probably going into male. But I think that broadly there isn't much merit to a fairness argument, because that's not why women's sports were created, and B, that women's sports aren't fair inherently. There's no way to make sports fair. So I think that in general we should just strive for what has the best societal consequences in terms of creating our sports categories.
Interesting. So you yourself will potentially be trying to play in women's sports this upcoming year, just to clarify.
Yeah.
Okay. Nuance, bro?
Yeah, so I don't care about women's sports, to be honest. I don't really watch them. Maybe if it's happening at the same time as a male sport, something like combat sports and the women are competing, I can enjoy that. But I think it's a bit silly to suggest that, obviously different people, different genetic backgrounds are going to have advantages, disadvantages, and even within the same sex. But when you introduce trans women into women's sports, on average, they're going to have a much greater advantage in the vast array of physical sports than biological women are. This is just, this is a fact. So I'd honestly be open to letting the women in each league vote if they actually want to compete with a trans woman. I think that would actually be a decent compromise. So the people who are, if they truly believe and they want to live by their principles, then, all the best to them. I'd be willing to give them that. But I don't think it's something that should be imposed on them. If you're talking about societal consequences, well, it seems like more women would be harmed than trans women would be harmed.
Well, yeah, so my opinion on this is, for the most part, transgenderism has come about, or for a lot of people, they would say it's always been around. The way that we treat it is typically through social changes today, whether you agree with that treatment or not. How we treat people with dysphoria is we try to change them socially. We try to change them, on a superficial level, whether it be surgery, changing hair, putting on makeup. These are some of the treatments that we use for gender dysphoria today, whether you disagree with them or not. When we talk about sports are not categorized by superficial femininity or masculinity. They are categorized by biological categories. Even within sports groups, if it's just, male MMA, female weightlifting, we categorize these things by biological standards, height, weight, female, male, not by the more superficial things. So I don't see why we should be allowing people in any category based on their gender identity rather than their biology.
All right, so I guess we can get into it. Nuance, bro, it actually doesn't seem like we're going to have much to disagree on here. You said it's a bit silly to say, and then it seemed like you actually didn't point to anything that you thought that was silly in what we said. It seems like you were just, you almost like moved off of that, because it doesn't seem like you have much disagreement with us at all. You said that you'd be down to let women in each league vote. I don't think there seems to be strong evidence that women in these leagues oppose letting trans women in, given that the existing standards are already decided by the leagues, right? So you also say it's not something you think should be imposed. It's not really currently imposed. I'm sure you'd agree with that. The leagues are sort of controlled by the market, right?
I wouldn't agree with that necessarily. So, for example, the recent races with like Leah Thomas and the USA Swimming, I guess, controls the rules for that. Or no, I'm sorry. Didn't the NCAA dictate the rules even for USA Swimming? I think there was a disagreement between USA Swimming and the NCAA. So the NCAA, I think, controlled the rules for that one. And the women who are competing in that race, I don't know how they would vote. It'd be interesting if, the ones who are in that race in particular got to choose, how would they vote? I think that's, I'd like to see the results of that.
So you think at each meet?
Interview someone from that. Sorry, I think Sav Says did interview someone that was either in that race or supposed to be in that race who said they were very against it. So I think that definitely.
So when you say imposed, Nuance, bro, you're talking about it being imposed by it being imposed by the corporations who own these businesses. You don't think they should be able to impose their will to run their business however they want.
Well, I'm not even entirely sure how like collegiate sports are organized. I don't think it's like private corporations. I think it's like
it'd be private businesses. They would. I'm not sure they're all.
I don't know exactly how they're organized. I think the people in, I'd be probably in support of legislation that allows the people in the race themselves, the actual competitors, to vote on that.
Again, do you want people to vote like at every single meet, that like before you get to the meet, you don't know what you're going to be competing with, you don't know who's going to be able to compete?
Sure, why not?
Probably just impractical.
So it's more impractical for them to hold a vote that would take like, I don't know, 20 seconds than to allow biological.
So you just want to have them like just asking them, is what you're saying, like just like a show of hands or something? Just like everyone in the room say aye or something.
You can make it private too, so they don't have to feel like the pressure of the public knowing how they voted individually. So
it seems like, well, and then you also want some kind of legislation. You're saying some kind of government legislation on what these corporations can do.
Sure.
Don't you think this seems like a highly bureaucratic method of like pushing out, I guess, a demographic that you don't even really know if they should or shouldn't be pushed out in the first place?
Sure, I mean, it's bureaucratic from the government level, and then you have the bureaucratic rules being pushed by the NCAA when they're setting
Yeah.
up these standards of like, okay, you have to have testosterone that tests no higher than 10 nanomoles per liter and stuff, and it has to be for this amount of period of time, and, you know, here's the mechanisms by which we're going to monitor that or not monitor that. That seems pretty bureaucratic too, so...
So what you're saying is you're taking it. You're not like removing that bureaucracy. You're just adding a government bureaucracy that's going to control what these corporations can and can't do. You're on board with this, right?
We could remove that bureaucracy. I mean, for all we know, we could have it so you don't even have like the testosterone requirements. Just allow these, the competitors to decide if they want to allow a biological male into a female.
Nuance, bro. If I'm not really sure what the rest of your political views are, but if you're arguing for democracy in the workplace, I think we're on board. I don't think it's the case that these women are going to like want trans women not to compete these sports. It seems like they have no issue with it currently. Some of them do, I'm sure, right? But the vast majority don't seem to, or at least we don't have strong evidence.
I have no idea. I think it would vary by state, probably drastically.
Yeah, you say it seems like they have no issue with it, but I don't think very many people would feel comfortable saying publicly if they did have an issue with it, given the, I would argue, public lynchings that happen against people who are deemed transphobic, even against people who would be, obviously I mean that hyperbolically, not literal lynchings, but social lynchings that happen against people who are deemed as transphobic, even people that are supposed allies and believe and support transgenderism. They get taken down just for being political commentators saying, hey, I might just oppose, transgender people playing in sports. You really think an individual athlete who's trying to save their ass in their career is going to feel comfortable speaking up about their opinion on transgenderism when they have no political
background? Shouldn't that show up in polling data?
In polling data? Do you have polling data of the swimmers?
Well, we don't have polling data of swimmers, but we have polling data of like women in general.
Of women in general? Well, not all women are athletes where they've got...
No, I'm aware. I'm just saying we have like... Oh, well, I think people who have their career on the line... What evidence do you have that there's like... Go ahead.
Yeah, people who have their career on the line, people who have their education on the line, scholarships on the line, are probably going to have a lot more investment in this subject than the average woman who is like, whatever, sure,
So what you're saying is that...
general polling is as relevant.
So what you're saying is you don't think it's the case that it could be... you don't think it's the case that it could even be measured, whether or not there is the case that women have this this standard of these women in sports at least have a standard of not wanting trans women in. You don't think that could be measured? You don't think there's any way we can know that?
I think Nuance Bro's suggestion of having a vote that is not public, where people can't see what you voted, would probably be the best way of measuring that. A show of hands is just a show of who to lynch, right?
So you're saying that this crucial decision that you think should decide whether or not we do or don't allow trans women into sports, you're saying you don't know if it's the case that it would actually bear out that trans women aren't even in sports because of that?
Sorry, repeat that?
Yeah, you're saying that you don't even know if it's the case that this decision would bear out against trans women in sports. You think we should be put to a vote, and you're not sure what the results of that vote would be.
I'm not saying that. That's Nuance Pro's suggestion. I'm kind of defending it because I think that's an interesting concept. Let people live and die by what they want to support politically, right? If that's what you want to go forward with, sure, it's unfortunate for the people who would maybe be in the minority and say, actually, no, I don't want to compete with people who have a biological advantage. But sometimes you just have to let things play out and let people figure things out for themselves, right?
I want the people who have something at stake to live with the consequences of their actions. So if they're going to be, pro-trans women in sports, and these are women, biological women who are in those sports, then okay, like you get to vote on it, you get to live with the consequences of your actions. If you're someone who opposes that, then you can also live with the consequences of those actions and not have trans women competing against you if, the majority of your teammates or whatever support that. So
we understand why we would have minority rights in systems like that, though, right?
What do you mean?
Well, like for example, you wouldn't want you wouldn't want black people, or you wouldn't want white people in 1750, right? You wouldn't want them to be voting on whether to abolish slavery or not. You would want like a constitutional protection for it to make sure that a minority can be protected from some extra harm. So when we're talking about like cis women versus trans women, we're talking about cis women, a very, very few select cis women who have to compete against a very, very specific trans woman, or on a broad societal scale, just cis women who don't get to see other cis women in the top scale as often, if that's even true. Whereas trans women have a mass suicidality, and the cultural perpetuation that trans women aren't women has a great, tremendous consequence. So there's like reason to have like a minority right system here.
So you're against the concept of majority rule democracy?
I'm in favor of majority rule and minority rights. I'm a liberal.
So you're against the concept of democracy, like people vote on something.
What?
You want
Constitutions aren't anti-democracy.
Well, if you're going against the will of the people, that's kind of anti-democratic. So
It wouldn't be anti-democratic to have constitutional protections. So if we want to make sure the democracies last long term, having a constitution is really important for that.
I think their point is like you couldn't have the majority vote to take away, women's right to vote. There are some like intrinsic things, but I think
it was a vast majority that implemented the women's right to vote in the first place. Like they didn't have it, and then the vast majority voted.
It just doesn't.
That's not true.
That doesn't really address the point. Well, it's not true, and it doesn't address the point, right? The point. So that even it could be the case, right, that we could even grant the idea that it is, right, just for the sake of not disputing something empirical. It would still be the case that we wouldn't want it to be that we wouldn't want people to be able to just vote away women's right to vote. We wouldn't want that to be allowed, right? Because otherwise it subverts democracy.
But you can do that. You can do that. You can amend the Constitution.
We can amend the Constitution. This is correct, and we want the Constitution amended, right? We want the Constitution to have certain rights enshrined into it, right? So, in the case that we want to preserve a democracy long term, we don't just want like democracy to be willy nilly. We want democracy to have like rules and regulations that make sure it stays democratic long term. So we have minority rights because of this.
Yeah, I think the issue is the type of rights being demanded. So you think that transgender women's right to play in sports should be enshrined in some sort of law?
No, I think that the way that works best is to allow these to allow the social norms of society to continue to progress forward, and allow these private companies to make decisions in a reasonable way. I think that the way they're doing it currently is, given our current social norms, is pretty reasonable. Letting trans women be in sports, it doesn't seem like there's any reason to push back against this. If you want to say there's a place for workplace democracy there, I'm not going to oppose this. But I don't think it's the case that this is a solid argument for banning trans women from sports. I don't think it doesn't even seem that you want to ban trans women from sports, Nuance, bro. It seems like you just don't really care.
Would you support abolishing like even sex segregated or even whatever gender segregated sports at all? Like, would you support banning that?
Like long term in like 100 years or something?
Why 100 years? Why not now?
Well, nobody would ever support banning it here. We might support
What do you mean nobody? What if I support it? What if there's a lot of people that support?
If you support it, maybe.
So if I support it, then you would support it, is what you're saying?
I'm asking you, do you support it?
I'm open to it. Listen, because again, I told you I don't care about women's sports. I think it would actually be a good way for women to see how men are superior in every physical way when it comes to sports, and it would be just an open category. You don't have to worry about transes in sports and stuff if it's just the open category of men's sports.
That's an interesting position. We have base gender abolitionist Nuance Pro over here. He wants it right now. He doesn't just want trans women in sports.
I want to jump in here. I don't think Nuance Pro is a gender abolitionist. I think he's a male supremacist. Like, this is a smart, conniving way that my gender can obliterate all of women's faces. It's genius.
Genius is an interesting way to describe it. I think it's certainly an interesting position. I think that if it's the case that we maybe we have some ability for certain people who wouldn't be able to access sports entirely, allowing people on testosterone to compete in sports, for example, with some range or some caps for safety reasons. I think that maybe this idea could even be feasible. I just don't expect it to be super feasible.
Wait, but do you support
right now?
it, though? Like, why aren't you answering
Right
the
now?
question?
I have.
Why not now?
I was really clear with the answer.
Why trans?
Well,
Wait.
the distinction that was made that
Why
got
not abolish sex or gender segregation of sports?
So you're
periods?
saying
Why don't you support
saying
that?
I haven't? You're saying I haven't answered the question?
Hold on,
and then
it seems to me.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it seems to me like you're sounding a lot like the
Mm-hmm.
racist whites of the 1950s that wants to keep black people out of sports. Like, why would you not support getting rid of any segregation in sports? Why are you not an anti-segregationist?
So I think it's really interesting that you've said I haven't answered the question and then responded to my answer to the question. This is really fascinating to me. So the reason why I would say that it doesn't make much sense to push for this now is because I don't think it's going to provide any sort of like massive benefits to push for this immediately. I think if you say like 100 years down the line or something, should we abolish it? Yeah, sure, whatever. It's just that I don't think it's really super important at the moment.
Well, you know, I remember there was a great man who once said, "Justice delayed is justice denied." So it seems like you want to delay justice.
So true.
Is that what's going on?
So true. You caught me.
I mean,
So
it seems like
to get back to the-
you want to delay and deny justice.
I think it's a worthwhile question. If you
Is it really?
Yeah, it absolutely is a worthwhile question. Why not abolish all, gendered categories altogether? Especially if there is no real meaningful biological difference between men and women.
Do you think there's no meaningful biological difference between men and women?
I think the people arguing that transgender people should be able to play in women's sports seem to think that.
why?
Have I ever said that?
So why would you... Okay, so you acknowledge there is a meaningful biological difference between men and women, but you still want transgender people to play in women's sports?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the biological difference doesn't matter to you then. So why not abolish all categories?
So the biological difference between trans women and cis women is a much smaller difference than the difference between cis men and cis women. Like one of them has like...
Why is that the comparison?
Because we're saying we want to abolish the category.
So...
They would be really relevant here.
The biological difference between trans women and cis women is smaller than the biological difference between men and women. But
Substantially.
So do you believe that transgenderism, for someone to be transgender, they have to fit into a certain appearance? They have to do a certain amount of drugs. They have to, they have to do some sort of change to themselves to be transgender?
Sorry.
Or do you think someone can be transgender without, taking hormones or cutting their dick off, right?
What is your definition of transgender?
What is my my definition of transgender?
Yeah. So I know the question you're asking because you use that word in it.
So someone who wants to be the other gender and is saying that they identify as the other gender.
Okay, so you'd answer the question with no then, right? And I'd answer it with no as well. That has nothing to do with
Okay.
None of your definition has anything to do with hormones.
So if you want to be transgender, you don't have to change anything biologically about yourself. So why would you say? Why would it even matter if you can find some sort of statistical difference between trans women and cis women when you're saying that to be trans you don't have to change yourself biologically at all? So men on average are taller, are stronger, have larger shoulders, larger lungs, larger hearts, all of these different things, and they could just say, I am a woman now, and be transgender by your definition and go and enter women's sports.
The current standards in these organizations do restrict them based on hormones.
Do you think
Is that something you support, though?
In 100 years? No, not 100 years, but right now I think it's...
Hold on,
because it's important to clarify my answer to your question. I have to make sure that I'm answering clearly and not just giving you an ambiguous answer.
No, wait, what your position, your morality is going to change in 100 years or something?
I think...
No, the conditions in which...
Your current... Your advocate...
Can I answer your question?
Yeah, please answer the question.
Yeah. My morality isn't changing in 100 years, but the conditions in which I'm doing an action are changing in 100 years, right? So, if we say, we don't have the categorical rule of you should never kill somebody, right? We have the rule of, you shouldn't kill someone if it's not justified in the situation, right? So, there's a difference in situations here. And I think there's a difference in actions taken because of that morally.
No, the situation you're describing in the like justified self-defense is like the action is self-defense, and that's why it's justified. Whereas for the 100 years, you're talking about, well, I feel like the norms of society aren't there yet, so therefore you're not supporting it. Like, do you support it right now, absent like whatever you think society may or may not accept? Your position.
Wait.
We're asking about your position.
Yeah, I know you're asking about my position, but my position is dependent upon what we can and can't do. I think we should do the best we can. I don't think we should do like wild, outlandish ideas that don't work.
You're king of the universe.
Yeah,
I
get to snap my
what
fingers.
he's arguing for, and someone in this chat mentioned this, a thin, he's just trying to like slowly push society in one direction, but it seems like you'll keep going further and further as long as you'll get social validation and society is willing to accept that. So
not social validation, you're mistaken.
Admit that it is your view now, you hold that view now, but you're just not ready to make that statement until it is socially acceptable.
I've made my statement really, really clear. I think in 100 years, sure.
Why in 100 years?
I said that.
I don't argue with the version of you 100 years from now.
Hold on, let me answer. Hold on, let me answer Lauren's question really fast. Just a second. Let me answer Lauren's question. So the reason why I say in 100 years is because right now there's no reason to push for this. We will not be able to get that change. It's ridiculous to push for things that we cannot get.
That's what I mean. You want this to happen, but you just don't have the social validation for your ideas for it to be possible yet.
You're trying to portray this as though I'm not being like clear about what I want. I've told you several times. Yeah, in the far future, I'm fine with this.
So you do think that people should
right now if they would allow you to, correct?
No, I would be fine with it right now if it would. I would be fine with it right now if it would produce good outcomes.
Why wouldn't it produce good outcomes right now?
Because nobody supports it. Because nobody supports it, and because of the fact there'd be a huge social backlash.
But that's what Nuance is saying. He's saying if they allowed it and if they did support it, you would be for it.
Okay. You're saying the question you're asking me is, if everyone in society was on board with this and there was no transphobia and there was no social backlash and there was no like sexism that might push women out of certain spaces and there are like no adverse consequences socially, would I support it? The answer is yes, and so would you.
Hold on. Well, yeah, 100% obvious. Okay, but what about 30%? If 30% supported it, would you support it?
If 30% supported trans women, currently more than 30% already do.
No. I'm saying for this 100 years version of yourself, if society reaches 30% acceptance, is that enough for you?
If society reaches 30% acceptance, is it enough to mold men and women's spaces together?
Yeah, for whatever your 100-year position is. No, that's not enough for you to support it. You said you wouldn't support it right now because you think the outcomes wouldn't be beneficial or whatever.
Yeah.
Is 30% enough for you?
Is 30%, so 30% of people alone, I would have no idea whether it would or wouldn't be enough because you ignored all of the other factors I mentioned.
So, okay, once again.
You can exhale and like sigh condescendingly, but that's not a counter argument.
How about 60%?
Okay. You are doing the same problem, which is you're ignoring all of the other things I mentioned. Like, did you just forget those?
Yeah, give me the other ones. Remind me.
Can I jump in here quickly with that?
Go ahead, Lauren.
Sorry, I'm really curious. So the 100 years, no HRT, just have all these spaces mixed. Do you feel that would destroy women's ability to be competitive in sports?
Okay, you might have just not listened. No, it wouldn't destroy women's ability to be competitive. I give you the reasons we could make them still competitive in this market.
Why would they still be competitive?
Wait, by having them like juicing on tests and stuff? Is that what you were advocating for?
As long as they're not as long as they're not like unhealthy, right? I'm okay with them competing in the sports. I'm not sure what you're making this weird, wacky argument about like juicing.
How would women be competitive in sports where they didn't have their own categories?
Okay, so it's dependent upon the specifics of the sport, right? But the existing standard of allowing trans women into sports is not going to erode away women's ability to be competitive because they're already in there and they're still competitive.
But
Sorry,
we're talking about
I want to go
years.
Just a second. Okay, just a quick poll of the room. Do either of you actually oppose trans women being in women's sports right now?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah,
why?
I think it's stupid. Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad you guys are being open about your position now. Why do you guys think this?
We both opened with that.
No, Nuance Bureaucracy didn't care.
I don't care, but I think it's stupid. So I think like
I don't care, but I do care. I just think it's stupid.
no, here I'll explain. So I think it's obvious that trans women in biological women's sports have an advantage versus, for example, trans men in men's sports. This is, you acknowledge this, right?
You're saying trans women have an advantage that's different than cis
A
women?
much greater advantage. A much greater advantage.
A much greater advantage over cis women than who?
Than trans men in men's sports.
Trans men in men's sports don't have an advantage. I
What
agree.
trans men in men's sports, Nuance, bro?
Yeah, I mean, they can be in there and nobody cares because they don't win anything.
No.
That's the point.
People do. No. You're wrong. No. You're wrong. They do care. In fact, hold on. You guys are bouncing and. Jesus Christ, stop. You guys are bouncing back and forth between each other, not addressing the other side's arguments at all. So there are trans men who want to be in men's sports, and they're not allowed in there.
Well, wait, so
People do care. Conservatives do care. You guys push trans men out of men's sports.
let me. So the NCAA allows trans women in women's sports, but not trans men in men's sports, is what you're saying?
No, different different leagues
Go
have
ahead,
different standards, right? Like the leagues that I'm competing, I know trans men who aren't competing anymore because they had to compete with women, and it wasn't something that.
Sure, but in those leagues, the rules are basically the same for trans men and trans women, right? So like the trans women can't compete with women, and the trans men.
You're okay.
can't compete with
You
men.
are forgetting your own claim. You said nobody cares about trans men in men's sports. Yes, they do. Conservatives do push them out. You're wrong.
Okay, so dude, we're talking about the leagues where they're allowed to currently, okay? In those leagues where they compete.
No, we weren't.
They're not actually they're not winning. They're not
Yeah,
winning. Outside of like that power walking, and then there was like that one professional boxing fight that person had, and that was it. There's like really not, like they're not winning at the rate that trans women are.
Do you think there might be any societal factors which would push trans women into sports that trans men wouldn't be?
Do you recognize this?
Yeah. Did you hear what I said?
The societal
not listening at
factors
all.
that what?
The societal factors that would push trans women into sports that wouldn't push trans men into sports, like being raised a boy, where boys are pushed into sports way more than girls.
So you think that trans women?
Can you address the argument, please?
Wait, do you are
He's trying to
trans women?
understand it.
No. So, but the thing is, like, I would imagine a great factor would be that trans women are actually way more competitive in women's sports than trans men are in men's sports. Like, yeah, why would someone want to go to into a sport where they're just going to get dominated and destroyed?
So
Trans men. So there are plenty of trans men who do want to go into men's sports. They are not allowed to go into men's sports, and they feel bad.
Again, NCAA doesn't allow that.
Do you think there are more sports than just the NCAA?
Yes, but we're talking about the ones where they're currently
We're
allowed.
just-
We're
Yeah,
talking
so,
about the ones where they're
Nuance, I
currently
was saying,
allowed.
No, we're talking about a
spaces-
broad societal.
No.
We were
In the
talking about-
spaces
we were talking
where
about
trans
sports
people,
broadly.
in the spaces where trans people are allowed to compete, we are
Okay.
not seeing trans men compete. So you can't just keep saying conservatives aren't letting them when there are spaces where they are allowed to compete where they aren't, because they simply aren't competitive enough, because there are massive biological differences. You cannot just blame biological differences on conservatives that when you're talking about a
You're
different
just not
policy.
addressing the arguments we're making. You're just ignoring them entirely. It's like
Oh,
insane.
you
That's
keep
not
trying to
true.
shoot them because it's not convenient
I'm gonna
to
try to make
actually
it.
address
I'm gonna
our
try to make it
point.
really, really clear. If we're saying that like trans men do not want to compete in sports, right? Trans men do not want to compete in men's sports. If you're saying this claim, then you can't just restrict it to a subsection of men's sports, because if trans men do want to compete in men's sports, even if it's outside the NCAA, they still want to compete in men's sports, and thus you would not be correct. You would be the opposite
Listen,
of correct.
I'm a conservative, and I think most conservatives would say have at it. If they are being stopped somewhere, I think that's dumb. I think that absolutely women, trans men should be allowed to play in men's sports. Why? Because men's sports is the most competitive in the world, and if you can make it there, like no one is going to destroy it through gendered means, right?
I'll tell Lauren Southern.
Men's sports is not going to be destroyed if women went and joined it.
Lauren Southern, I'm going to tell my trans male athletes
There's
that
an
you said
exception
trans
to
rights.
that. No, there's an exception to that. It would be
I am
like
number one supporter.
no, there would be an exception to the trans men in men's sports, like as far as competitiveness, and that would be in early puberty development, like in late middle school, early high school, and if that trans male was supplementing with testosterone as prescribed by the doctor, that would there was that, what was it, Mac Biggs or whatever the person's name was, who was competitive and stuff, and they're being like juiced up, and they're gonna outcompete 14-year-old boys. So that's probably not something you would want to encourage.
So, because we have one conservative that does, I guess, want trans men not to compete in men's sports. I want this on this panel. One of the arguments you made earlier was more women would be harmed than trans women. I think if we talk about the number harmed, this would be true, but what's important to also note, Nuance Bro, is that it's not just the number harmed, but the severity of the harm, right? So if we had if 75% of a group stubbed their toe, right? And we have to choose between that or 25% of the group just dying or whatever, right? Then those two options, we could weigh them and we'd say, we should do the thing that makes 75% stub their toe, not the thing that makes 25% die. When it comes to the impacts on trans people currently have an incredibly high rate of suicidality. This is far more important than I don't know what you think the harm to women would be. I guess I guess they feel sad because there's some percentage decline in the rate at which they win sports against
scholarship opportunities.
Yeah, what happens when a woman kills herself because she doesn't get her scholarship that was going to bring her family out of poverty or something?
Okay, do you think that
trans suicides matter to you?
Do you think that trans women are going to be killing themselves at a lower rate than cis women when they don't get their scholarships?
I don't want to play a game of whose suicide or matters more, right?
No, it's about the number of suicides.
But it's not.
Even then, it's not about, okay, well, we're going to give you a specific special kind of right or ability because you're more likely to kill yourself if you don't get it. That's not how policies should be made.
And it's not a one-to-one.
Wait, that's how all medical policies work.
Trans woman who competes regularly and wins.
Well, hold on, Nuance, bro. Let's respond to the argument that was just made before you guys do the thing. You guys keep doing this thing where one of you makes an argument and the other one ping-pongs and you just gish gallop back and forth between the two of you. Let us respond to the argument just made, and then you can respond to our argument back and forth, right, one at a time. The idea that the scholarship thing will only apply to cis women is just, it's not a symmetry breaker here, right? Trans women will also have this applied to them, and thus the negative effect of a trans woman not being able to get her scholarship is just as bad as the negative effect of that cis woman who would have otherwise gotten a scholarship not being able to get one. So the argument here doesn't work at all. It's not a symmetry breaker. In the case of trans women, there is a higher rate of suicidality because of the lack of social acceptance. So segregating out the sports league and pushing them out entirely would absolutely be a thing that undermines the ability for us to get more social acceptance for trans people, in the same way that segregation in sports undermined our ability to get more social support for viewing black people as normal members of society. The same is true for trans people. And so there's no reason whatsoever why we should consider the harm done to women in this situation, the very minor harm done to women in this situation, more valuable than that done to trans women. There aren't enough trans women to push women out of sports, so the harm would be equal. And it's funny, you say more women would be harmed than trans women. That's probably not even true either, given the fact that you'd have to harm them one-to-one by pushing them out of the sport one at a time.
You just made an argument that there aren't enough trans women to push women out of sports, and the answer would be yet. I mean, look at Gen Z. It's over 20% of them identify as LGBTQ plus or whatever, compared to what the older generation that identifies the same way.
You would have banned all gay people from sports? I'm sorry, you would have banned all LGBTQ people from sports?
The whole point is it's increasing. It's going to become an increasing problem. So you're saying there's not enough. Well, what about when there is? You could. It's important to kind of stop these things before they become major problems. And again, one single person, or there's an example of I think it was 2 transgender people who pushed out over 80 women from qualifying to the next level of an event or a sport or whatever. And that's 2 versus 80. That's it's not a one-to-one thing.
When you say there's a rise in the number of trans people, can you give us the numbers on that? It's risen from what to what?
I don't remember. I think the difference was something close to 3,000% compared to the older generation. So this is same time. They're all existing in the same time, yet young people are identifying at a rate that's
3,000% of what?
Almost
Okay.
What do you
Sorry.
mean? What?
37%. What was the original percent that you like multiplied by?
Compared to
3,300?
compared to the older generation.
Yeah, what was the older generation?
What do you mean?
What was the percentage in the older generation?
Oh, I don't
You-
know.
you-
He's saying he's read an article that there's been a
3,000% higher.
3,000%
And I know that the LGBTQ
Then-
one, it's like it's
The point is, it's going to be like
so the
a tiny
portion-
decimal, right? Like a 0.1%. Not even, because trans people as a total of the population are less than 1%.
Would you consider non-binary people as trans?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're probably not going to be competing in like cross-sex sports at the same rate that like trans women would, right?
Can I ask something?
I don't know.
I want to kind of get down to the brass tacks of this conversation, which is, you know, when we're talking about this group, it's based on I don't want to say delusion, because I know that just immediately makes like progressives see red, but it is like we dysphoria is dysphoric. It's not actually what is reality. Like people are not actually biologically women. They feel they are.
What?
We give
No.
Wait, what do you think dysphoria means?
Yeah, I was gonna ask the same question.
You don't feel your mind and your body match, right?
No.
I think there.
Do you know what the word euphoria means, right?
So when you have gender dysphoria, it is not a mismatch between your mind and your body.
Gender dysphoria is a specific feeling that you get from what is clinically recognized as like a mismatch between the mind and the body.
Okay, right. And I believe
so
that
dysphoria though is explicitly like the antithesis of euphoria, right? It's like it's a feeling, it's a negative feeling. It can't be like true or false. A mismatch of the mind or body can be true or false, I guess. It depends on how you want to define it.
You get a feeling of dysphoria because of the mismatch.
Because of the mismatch between the identity and the body. I don't know that the
Okay.
mind is how I would classify it, but we could get into the nuance of that.
Okay, that's fine. So I absolutely believe you do see in a lot of different factors mismatches between the mind and the body. We see this with age in people. Some people are mentally, some people are mentally older than they actually are. You have people that are 14 that have incredible minds. You have people getting scholarships to universities way earlier than all of their peers, and they're mentally at a higher level than their peers, right? Then you have people that are mentally at lower levels. You have people that have the minds of 5-year-olds for large parts of their life that extend for large periods, and we have to treat them a certain way in order to make their experience in this world better. Their view of the world and how they are experiencing it isn't false. Like, they're not lying when
You said it was a
they
delusion.
say- There is, because they're not 5, right? If they go to a doctor's office, you're not going to give them the medicine dosage for a 5-year-old, but their mind genuinely perceives the world that way, and their mind is genuinely wired like that.
No, but if they're say like
And we
1 years
have
old,
to
right? Okay.
Wait, we do have to make the situation more comfortable for them. And I think that is one of those arguments that I do hear from progressives where I'm like, okay, so, that's what the argument is for transgenderism. The body might not be that way, but the mind is, and there are things we can do to make them more comfortable in their experience, like we would with someone who has a mismatch in age or whatever. That's one argument, right? But we still wouldn't let someone who is 40 with the mind of a 5-year-old play in children's sports, because there's obviously a difference there. And they're
Hold on, let's go one point at a time. You're like galloping on like 80 different arguments here. So the idea that it's a delusion.
It's all the same argument. It's just
you made the
path.
claim it's a delusion, right? That they believe a thing which is not true, right? That's what a delusion is. When you believe something not true. Now you're like walking that back. You're saying it's not the case they believe something not true. There's nothing they believe that isn't true. If they're what they
I
believe.
think your view.
Hold on. I spoke for like I spoke for like 30 seconds there.
Yeah, but you're misunderstanding.
Okay, so your claim was just a delusion, right? You made this claim.
There is a delusion in believing that person with the brain of a 5-year-old is a 5-year-old. Yes. That person isn't necessarily delusional, but if you on the outside believe that then you are delusional.
Do you think I believe a delusional thing about trans women?
If you think that they should be treated the same in sports as biological women, yes, I think that's delusional.
You think a should statement is a delusion? Like a moral statement, you think would be a delusion?
I think if you look
trans
at
women are
Hold
women,
on, Nuance, bro. Let her. Okay, so I'm trying to ask Lauren about the claim she just made before you move on to a different one, Nuance, bro. Lauren, do you think a should claim, a moral claim, can be a delusion?
Yes, if it's deontology.
I need an answer to that. Do you think a should claim can be a delusion? Do you have an answer?
Honestly, I don't know what you're even talking about.
I'll explain to you. You just said that the delusion that I have is that I think trans women should be treated a certain way, right? No, it's not a delusion. It's not what a delusion means. You made the claim there was a delusion that I have in belief. You analogized it to the idea that somebody would be delusional if they believed like somebody with like age regression or something is like a like this 40-year-old
Okay. Do you think trans women are women and they are the same as biological women and therefore should be able to play in the same sports because they're basically the same?
Well, and the same as biological women? Of course not. We have different adjectives there for a reason, right?
Okay, so they're not the same as could we just call sports cis women's sports? Like,
no, hold on, you're moving away from the weird delusion claim you made.
Okay, yeah, because I thought you thought they were the same, and that's why they should be able to play.
We've said multiple times, you've said that at the beginning of the conversation, and every single time you've said it, we've corrected you. I don't know why it's like hard for you to understand. Of course there's a difference between trans women and cis women.
It's hard for me to understand how you can accept that and still not understand the concept of having gendered sports categories.
We can understand the concept, we just don't think it's a good one.
Sure.
Okay. We know what your argument is, right? We understand your argument. You are I don't think you're doing it on purpose. I don't think it's intentional, but you're not understanding ours. It seems like you have a bunch of associations with other people you've talked to, or maybe like people you've heard about, that you've heard talked about, and you're projecting those onto us. We don't believe that. The left usually doesn't believe that. We have different adjectives there.
Okay, so you think trans women and women are different, you think they are biologically different, but you still think that they should play in the same sports. So yes. My argument at the beginning was I think that biological categories are important in sports. So you don't think
I'll walk you through it. You said we categorize these things by biological standards. Yes. Height and weight were your examples, right?
Yes.
Okay. When it comes to height, what sports are we talking about where we categorize it by height?
These are just like generalities within men and women. Men tend to be taller, which is why we put them in one category. Women tend to. You know what? Height and weight class is MMA and fighting sports. We do that.
What
height and weight class?
We have a height class and which
just say weight class.
We don't have a height class. Yeah.
Okay.
It would be ridiculous, in fact, to restrict sports based on heights. We would never do that. If we look at women's NBA, we see that I think Brittany Griner, right, is 7 feet tall. There are like probably like 4 7 feet tall trans women in America. Is it ridiculous
to do it for weight?
In the case of combat sports, I don't think so. In the case of football, it would be. The reason it's not in the case of combat sports, I think that there is a huge reason to want the safety aspect there, because we don't want the competitors to die.
Wait a minute. The safety aspect. Do you think there's a bit of a safety aspect when it comes to trans women in women's MMA?
In the case of women's MMA, I think even long term, like 100 years from now, it makes sense for us to have call them endocrine classes or something, right? So I think this is perfectly fine for safety concerns.
Wait, endocrine classes?
He means hormones.
Well, specifically,
having a hormone class where it's like, okay, this is the 700 nanogram per deciliter.
This isn't
hormone class.
Well, you're a little bit mistaken. Endocrine is not just hormones, right? So endocrine is the manifestation of hormones. It's not the hormones themselves. So what we'd want to do is we'd probably want to make sure that people are, for a certain period of time, at a certain range of hormone levels to be in a certain hormone, like endocrine class or something. I think this would, because of this, it sort of gives us a more implicit or a more specific, I think implicit is probably a fine word to use here, justification for you're doing this like smug, rubbing your head thing or whatever.
No, it's that's
I literally rubbed my head one time during this whole fucking.
I don't know. You keep doing a smug, exasperated thing.
Camera off so you don't see it.
No, it's fine.
Oh my god!
Come on. Obviously, I don't. All right. When it comes to this idea, right, that we should have
wants to let biological women, biological males into women's sports.
I would never be exasperated.
I'm not upset. What are you talking about? I'm perfectly calm. The nuance, bro. I'm just when it comes to the combat sports argument, right? So there's a difference between this sports and all the other ones, because in this one, people punch each other in the head and they could die. In the other ones, punching people in the head is usually just permitted. Obviously, there are some that are riskier than others, right, like football or whatever.
But why would it
we still
matter
want
if people
safety
are punching
concerns.
each other in the head if there's
we don't-
if there's
we don't want
such
the competitors to
similarity
die.
between trans women and biological women, which is what you were arguing earlier. You were arguing there's
is.
more similarity between trans women and biological women than there is between, men and women, so they should be able to play
That
in
would
the
be
same
true.
sports categories. But
Well, that's
then
why
you're
he
saying,
gets around
let's
it
make an
with the
exception
endocrine
for
classes.
let's make an exception for MMA.
For the sake of not killing people, yes.
So there are significant enough differences in certain sports for you.
Not for the sake of fairness. The point is to not kill the competitors.
They're
But if
already
one
not killing
competitor-
each
You
I
other.
don't want them to
in MMA.
die.
But
They're
if one
already not
competitor
killing
is
each other.
capable of killing
each
the other
other in MMA.
competitor,
There are cases where people
just
died in
based
MMA.
on just
How
based
many
on their
people
biology
died in the
alone.
UFC?
Wait, no. This is a really
The
important
UFC
point.
specifically.
Wait, guys, this is a really important point. If there is a sport where one group of people, we are literally afraid they are going to murder the other group of people because they are so much stronger, why would that advantage not exist in other sports to a significant degree? And
think-
why would we not consider that advantage and maybe keep those people out of other sports as well?
Lauren, do you want weight classes in football?
No, we're talking about gender here.
Yeah, do you want
were
weight
just-
classes in football?
I don't know. I'm not a sports expert. We're talking about gender
You want weight
here
classes
and
in any
biology.
sports other than MMA?
I don't.
We do it
How
in
is that
boxing.
relevant? Tell me how this is relevant.
That's true. That's a good point. So it's relevant because the point is, in this sport specifically, this very specific sport, we want weight classes for the same reason we want endocrine classes, because we don't want the competitors to die. So we don't think it's very likely they'll die, but any risk is not one that we really want to take here because they punch each other in the head.
But if
And
they're the
weight
same,
Classes
if they're the
for,
same weight
Olympic
class,
weightlifting.
if they're the same weight class, and one group can still
This is also
kill the other,
ironically, Nuance Pro. This is
That-
also to keep people from dying. So it's to keep people from dying because it is.
Weightlifting?
Yes. It's not because they're punching each other in the
Keep
head.
people from
Yes.
dying?
Yes.
What are
Yeah.
you talking about?
Yes. So if you're really, really, really heavy, it's easier for you to do powerlifting. That's why the powerlifters are all big fat guys. If you've ever seen them, they're big fat guys because it's really, really easy to lift a weight if you're really, really heavy versus if you're really, really light, right? And so if we
wait,
just
there
let them
are
do
weight
whatever they want.
classes in football.
I'm not sure what you're talking about here. In the case of specifically the powerlifting point, right? If we let people be
I said
really,
Olympic
really,
weightlifting, not powerlifting, but go ahead.
in the case of Olympic weight, I'm not sure what the distinction here is. In the case of
There's
Olympic,
a big distinction.
hold on. Listen to my argument. You might realize the distinction might not be important in this context. So the Olympic weightlifting, people who are trying to lift as much as they can using their bodies. If they're really, really, really heavy, it's easier for them to lift large weights. And if you're really, really, really heavy, you also are going to die of a bunch of heart-related diseases. So I think that's a good reason to have these weight classes here.
But people get big and heavy to lift heavier weight anyways, regardless of weight classes. What are you talking about?
They get big and heavy to lift heavier weights.
World's strongest man because they want to find out who's the world's strongest man.
Correct, and it's unhealthy and they die earlier because of it.
Well, they're also like 6'9" and they're going to be bigger anyway. Like they can't really control that, but
They die earlier anyways.
They have weight classes because it's like, look, we already know bigger people are going to lift heavier weights. If you want to be if you want to be competitive in a certain weight class, then we allow that for you because they want more people to compete. It's not to stop people from dying because they think some guy who's like 5'4" is going to try to put on 400 pounds to deadlift more weight.
So it is in fact the case that if we allow people to just not have weight classes, they will in fact put on more weight, not compete within their weight class, and thus they'll end up dying at an earlier age. The examples you gave of sports that are similar to this sport but don't have the weight classes are ones where people die really early. An example of a combat sport where there are sometimes weight classes and sometimes not, depending on where you are, would be sumo, right? That's a combat sport. There's sometimes a weight class depending on where you are and sometimes not. In the places where there isn't, you see people dying in that field of a bunch of heart-related diseases because of the fact that they weigh incredible weights. They're like humongous, like planet-sized individuals. So that's the reason why in combat sports it makes sense to have these weight classes. Now that we're done with that tangent, the reason we have these endocrine classes is because we don't want people to die. So I think point made.
So I think the hormone, like endocrine classes would actually, before I go on this rant, would you want every sport to be dictated by hormone or endocrine classes? Why wouldn't that make sense?
As it exists now, as it stands now, I think that's what they currently do.
Okay. So what you mean by that? Wait, elaborate on that, actually.
In the status quo, that's fine, is I think what he's trying to say.
Yeah, they already do that.
As in splitting men and women's sports? They do that by endocrine classes? Is that what you're saying?
Essentially, I think hormone
for
levels is how they do it right now, but endocrine classes would be more specific and better.
Currently they do it by hormone. They do it by hormone over a period of time, which ends up being like analogous to endocrine classes. The issue is they only do it for trans people, right? And so what we see because of this is we see a huge biasing in the top levels of these elite sports towards women who are intersex, right? Towards women who have like naturally way higher testosterone levels, right? Than like the bias you'd see in a trans woman. If you want to worry about like pushing the rest of women out, that's an example.
There was like an Olympic runner who had really high testosterone levels naturally, and she wasn't allowed to compete, if I recall correctly. And I think
you think that's sad?
I can't remember what their name was, but I can look it up if you want. But I thought that was really, I think that's ridiculous. That's why I don't really want this to be based on, endocrine levels. I'd like a woman who naturally produces a lot of testosterone to be able to dominate in her field rather than be kicked out.
Doesn't she have that's interesting. Doesn't she have a biological advantage like that, though?
Sure, there are some biological advantages that exist within certain groups. A man who is super tall is going to have a biological advantage against other men. But the biological differences between men as a whole and women as a whole are so extreme to the point where we literally have different body parts that it doesn't make sense to. It's not just like, I've trained a lot and had a bit of height extra. It's like very
it's a lot like you have
broader shoulders.
Yeah, it's a lot like if you had like naturally way higher testosterone than the norm. Like if your testosterone was way higher, like from the womb.
Testosterone being higher is a lot different than literally having different body parts, right? Different bone structure.
Why?
Well, how do you think bones are formed?
Women's center of gravity is literally different than men's, just based on our body being developed for carrying babies. Like
the reason for that is because of the influence of the influence of hormones.
Yeah, at both birth, when you're developing in the womb, there's a spout of hormones that change the biology of a child, and then through puberty, and it becomes such an extreme difference between men and women that to some degree we have to separate it for it to be fair in sports. And I think most
and all these arguments you guys are making, I don't see why it wouldn't apply. Dude, what do you, fuck you, dude? I haven't spoken like this entire time. Jesus Christ.
You have actually been speaking the most since.
Shit, you've been just talking this whole time.
He's flipping out. Holy shit. Okay, he's having a little bit of a meltdown. I just want to be able to
cucumber this whole time. Like every time I try to speak,
I just want to be able to address the argument.
Bro, calm down.
Relax. Just a second. Okay. I want to be able to address Lauren's argument. I'll kick it back over to you, and then you can say whatever you want, right? No. Okay, take a deep breath. All right, it's okay. In the case of the argument you just made, right, about there being a biological difference, right? You're saying there's this biological difference that's too great. Do you think the biological difference between people with wildly higher testosterone levels is going to be less significant than the biological advantage of, say, trans women who have testosterone within the normal ranges?
It's not about that, because you are talking about someone who is maybe an individual transgender, male to female, is going to be in the normal ranges of women, right? And maybe even their body, they won't be able to compete. Maybe they'll compete at an average level. But it's about opening up that Pandora's box, because once you've opened it and you've said, okay, you can enter so long as you identify as transgender, we're not just going to get someone who potentially falls into that category of average or normal. You are going to get people that are extremely competitive and are way higher. I'm sure you've heard the example a million times where Serena Williams wouldn't even compete in the top 200 men. I think it's even top 400 men in tennis. the exacerbated differences are so extreme that, yes, while you may be able to find like an outlier here and there within the transgender community,
You said it doesn't matter how extreme they are.
would compete very average compared to women. Once you open that Pandora's box, once you say women's sports are open to people who identify as this category, it is open to all of this whole group of humans that have this exceedingly high advantage, which is why
You
keep it closed.
So when we look at like trans women, right, or when we're looking at the categorization and the distribution, sorry, that's the word I'm looking for. The reason that we're going to find like these outliers that are going to be so massively different is because we're going to be looking at the far ends of the man and women spectrum. But when we're looking at like just trans women, right, this is going to be a very, very small section that are going to be the percent that have gender dysphoria. If your argument is that people are going to start transitioning for this purpose, that seems unlikely given that gender dysphoria is, once you transition, if you don't have gender dysphoria before you transition, there seems to be a significant possibility of developing gender dysphoria after you transition. And we know that things like depression and anxiety can worsen sports performance. So these things are going to have a pretty negative effect on that, plus the 41% suicidality thing. If they're, transitioning for that purpose.
To say.
I mean, it's a true statement, right? It's like bad to bring up if you're trying to harass trans people with it, but it's not like bad to bring up as a recognition of like this is a really bad mental disorder that like damages people. Otherwise, when we're looking at like 0.1% of men, we're very unlikely to see like the far ends of the distribution. Of course, the larger the sample size you're going to get, the higher the outliers are going to be. Obviously, it's going to follow normal distribution pretty normally, but if it's only 0.1% of the population, like Cynth said earlier, there's probably 4 trans women who are as tall as some of the women in the WNBA. In the entire country, the level at which we're competing is.
I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. There are differences between, when people decide to identify as trans or come out as trans or whatever, they tend to be of a certain subcategory of people that already have, certain psychology, biology differences, and this.
That's not my point.
Similar to women. I get what you're saying in the sense that.
Can I rephrase it so that it makes can I make it more concise?
It's more average. All right, go quick average because apparently I just didn't get it.
Okay, yeah. So
to you, Nuance, bro. What happened to that lie?
Well, ask Lauren about that.
Just wanted to make that note. But shouldn't we move on to the?
I do want to.
Another topic we were supposed
to discuss. Let's do that. I do want to.
That seems fine by me.
There though, because if you are saying there are some differences, some manipulation that can be made with hormones to make it kind of fair between trans women and women, I'm just assuming that's kind of what you've said.
As fair as sports ever are, I guess, sure.
Okay, yeah, there we go. It doesn't matter to me because I don't see any reality in which progressivism or this progressive push forward ever stops and ever regulates itself. The definition of what is transgender and who can be transgender, who can identify with any group, every year continues to grow and grow and grow to the point where it's like, no, you don't have to. If you think even someone should do social transition, if you think someone should have to grow their hair out and put on makeup to identify as a woman, you're now bigoted because people shouldn't have to do anything. There should be no effort. There should be no hormones. So this category of what people consider transgender just keeps expanding. And I also know a lot of the progressives who are pushing for this are also gender abolitionists altogether. And like you said, on your 100-year goal, it's to have no sports categories at all. So either way, I think that this is literally just opening Pandora's box to something that is going to destroy women's spaces and women's sports, undeniably, based on what you have described to me and based on what I've heard from progressives over the last 10 years.
On the categorization of trans thing, the reason that a lot of people will say that you shouldn't have to like meet any XYZ criteria to be trans is mostly just because not gatekeeping it while people are exploring what their gender identity might be seems to have good societal consequences long term. Whether somebody is actually like whether somebody is actually trans, I would still say it is almost always going to be determined on like gender dysphoria, right? There's almost no reason for somebody to like go through a full transition unless they have gender dysphoria. It's still better. It produces better consequences to let people explore and not force them to identify any which certain way, and let them explore certain labels and identities while they're figuring shit out.
Okay, all right. Yeah, let's move on to the DeSantis bill in Florida. I will once again start with our progressive friends here. You know what? We started with synth last, so let's start with phenomics. What are your thoughts on the the don't say gay bill, but the right are calling it the anti-groomer bill? There's two names for it. It's actually just keeping family safety, I think. Family.
It's HR 1151, right?
Yeah, 1151.
H1557.
1557.
It's like protecting parental rights, I think is in the name of the bill there. But what are your thoughts on that, phenomics?
Sure. So I think 1557 is broadly pretty bad. I think that there are parts of the bill that are defensible, but the number, there's also a lot of parts that are indefensible. The number one issue I take is with the sexual orientation and gender identity instruction line, the part where that's banned. I think there's a lot of problems with this. The easy example that's been brought up a lot is what if a kid has two gay parents? How do you explain that? What if a kid's getting picked on for having two gay parents? Can a teacher get involved? Another really good example is a teacher who has a husband, for example, a male teacher who has a husband. Are they allowed to tell their students who that husband is? How much are they allowed to instruct on that? It seems like the language of the bill is pretty broad and sweeping. So should it be interpreted that way, it could have a lot of problems, and I don't see like a good way of interpreting it that's like logically consistent and doesn't have a lot of problems.
Okay, Nuance Pro, at last.
Yeah, it generally seems like a good bill. I think there are some areas where you'd want clarification so that it's not like, you don't want it to run into being unconstitutionally vague, which is how a lot of laws like this would get struck down in the courts. Kind of like what Phenomics was referring to. There could be some issues there. But generally speaking, it involves parental rights. I think that's important. It actually creates a lot of specific timeline saying, well, you can file this here and they have to respond within 30 days, and then 7 days after this they have to do this. And I like a lot of those things. I like that it gets parents involved with their kids' lives a lot more and allows more transparency. And I don't think there's really much reason to teach sexual orientation or gender identity to kindergartners through third graders. So and then the grades after that has to be age appropriate. So I'm generally in favor of the bill.
Age appropriate is also a pretty vague term.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about with constitutional vagueness.
All right, Synth.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think the argument that is unconstitutional is just like objectively true. It's almost inarguable. The restriction on speech like that's that encompassing is just like there's just not really, I think, a strong argument in favor of something like that. I think it restricts K to third grade, blanket across the board to discuss many matters that are involving sexual orientation or gender identity. There is the level of it's so vague that it's unconstitutional. I think there's like a Vox article about that or something. The argument here, right? In the case of the specific the specific bill here, HB 1557, I think if you want to restrict the ability for teachers to communicate with their kids about sexual orientation, what you end up doing is I can understand the anti-groomer aspect of that, but then there's it just doesn't really hold water. Given that what if a kid has gay parents or something that comes up in the classroom, are teachers just supposed to stay silent on that? The gender identity stuff is, I think, even worse because there's just nothing sexual related to that, right? You're just nothing sexual related to that, I should say. It's just it's unironically an insane, indefensible bill. I have no idea how somebody's gonna push back against it or push back against the criticisms of it.
Okay, so I'd like to think that 90% of the bill is not controversial with people here in the sense of what it's trying to do. Beyond, obviously, there's going to be that dissent between us on the gender stuff. But for me, the majority of it just talking about parents need to be informed when any medical decisions are being made for kids, when any psychological tests are being done on kids. Fantastic, amazing. Whenever there's decisions, or schools cannot put in a policy that a teacher can tell kids not to go home and tell their parents. They can't create a test or a quiz that says don't tell your parents about that. I think that is fantastic, especially when it comes to anti-grooming. You can't have a teacher tell a kid don't tell your parents this. I think that is a fantastic bill. I can't imagine why this stuff wasn't already discussed. Maybe it has already been put in place by school boards, but as one of the only parents in this conversation, definitely something I would want at any school I sent my child to. Now, when it comes to the sex and gender identity stuff, I don't have a problem with that. I think that is generally, even when it comes to hetero relationships, don't see any point talking to kids about it when they're, this is talking about like 4-year-olds to 9-year-olds, I think it was. We're not even getting it, 10 is usually when you get the puberty talks in schools. We're not even getting into that area. And this isn't even restricting puberty talks for that matter. So I don't even think kids can conceptualize sex, what the idea of it, the purpose is, all of these things at those ages, and I don't think we should try to force it on them, push it on them, whether it be hetero or homosexual. It doesn't matter to me at that age. It's not relevant to them.
It's not sex. It's sexual orientation in general, and it's also gender identity, right? So, I think it's there's no way that you actually think that we should never talk to kids about heterosexual relationships.
When did I never said we should never talk to them about heterosexual relationships.
You said,
so are you...
Even in hetero relationships, you did verbatim say that.
So are you...
Hetero relationships, when talking about, sexual orientation, right? And gender identity.
Are you okay with talking about romantic orientation?
But perhaps that's a different conversation, romantic orientation. But even then, I don't know why a teacher would discuss that with the students. Beyond if it's in a book, right? Beyond if it's in something.
If it's in a book or something that's happening in real life, or like history, or a lot of things that are taught in school.
Because sometimes teachers are like, "Hey, me and my spouse just got married." Because it just comes up. It's like, we should ban that.
Yeah, probably don't have teachers talk about their personal lives in a math class.
What?
Let them teach the material. In my opinion.
That seems insane.
No, listen, I didn't know really shit about my teachers' personal lives when I was going through school. And, if you saw them outside of school, it was weird. It was really
I think that's actually probably the safer take. Yeah.
Yeah, just teach them math, teach them science, and,
It's not your
You never, ever want the teacher to create a bond with a student? Do you have any idea how good teaching outcomes are created?
Trying to talk to... kids about how you and your boyfriend watched a Netflix show last night. Teach them.
Do you think that there might be any advantage in an educational sense to having a relationship with?
There's advantages and there's disadvantages, and I think in the current environment, it's probably best to just stick to the material.
Think you can be a friendly teacher while remaining your personal life and your, school life.
I want you to...
You can talk about Tigger or something instead of the threesome you had on the weekend, right?
Nobody's talking about sex, right? We all agree that you shouldn't be talking to children about sex.
You can tell them about, you can talk to a 5-year-old about whatever, Cars movie just came out instead of, the Tinder dates you went on the weekend. That's not to do with sex, right? That's
hold on.
I still probably
Lauren,
don't want a teacher talking about the heterosexual amount of Tinder dates they went on. Shut the fuck up with the debate bro terms. I hate gishgaloving.
You're gishgaloving.
Holy shit.
So everything you said so far has been untrue. You're just trying to filibuster and fill out the airtime. And sorry, debate bro term. In the case of the claims you just made about this,
everything I just said is untrue.
Almost.
Yes.
I'm about to explain to you.
Did I say that was untrue?
We're about to go through.
I am about to tell you. I'm about to tell you what the things you're saying are completely
untrue.
The things you're saying that are in regards to the bill are in wild misrepresentation of the bill. So in the case of the bill itself, if the teacher comes to school one day and the kids ask "Hey, Mrs. Southern, why weren't you at school yesterday? Why do we have a substitute?" and you were getting married or something, what you have to say, according to your rule, is, sorry, I can't tell you. How the extra House bill that bans hetero relationship talk is complete. It makes it off limits for me to mention to you what I was doing when I was getting married. Like, this is ridiculous. This is
Here's
like
what you say.
the most insane shit.
Anyways, 3 times 3 is...
Yeah, if you're incredibly grating and annoying to your kids and you never build any kind of social bond, that's really reasonable.
With an answer to that question, that's so difficult.
I would honestly, I'd prefer, they just not talk about their personal lives. But if you want to say you get married, I don't think there's any reason to have to go into, hey, I got married, and by the way, I am attracted to my partner because of this trait, that trait, and this trait, and this is what this sexual relationship or a sexual attraction.
So, okay, wait,
Did you not read?
let's just do a really, really basic scenario, right? Let's do a really, really basic scenario. You say, I got married. Your kid, because you're Miss Southern, right? Your kid says, who's the husband? And you have to say, I can't tell you who I married, but it's not that. But I can't tell you why, because I can't explain how sexual orientation...
Why do you have to get into that? Don't worry about it. Get into their times table.
Never ever talk about your personal life.
This is ridiculous. I guess we'll just...
I don't want teachers talking to my kids about their personal life, whatever.
Yeah, okay. So, hey, just really quick, when you said 90% of the bill has nothing to do with the gender stuff, have you read the bill?
I have read the bill. I did a whole video on it that came out.
You read the entire bill, and you think 90% of it has nothing to do with
gender? You read the entire 5 pages with the 2 pages.
It's 7. It's 7. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's 5 pages of the actual language of the bill and 2 pages of a summary.
I know I am a woman, but I did make it through the entire 7 pages.
Slow down.
All by myself.
All 7 pages, and you think 90% of it has nothing to do with the gender shit.
Yes. There's one section that's one sentence that says sexual orientation. In fact, sexual orientation and gender is only mentioned in one sentence.
No, it is not. 3. You are wrong. Yes. No.
Okay, elaborate. Where am I wrong?
Yeah, it's firstly, it's on line 22, right? And it's also on line 98.
So it's in the summary, and then it's in the bill.
So it's mentioned twice in the bill. Hold on.
No. So it's mentioned once.
It's mentioned twice in a... It's mentioned twice.
Thank you. It's mentioned once in the bill, and it's mentioned in the summary.
Holy shit. Okay. So you think that it's within the scope of reasonable legality. Are you familiar with the idea of what a prior restraint is?
Just for the record, it was mentioned once.
First Amendment jurisprudence.
Lauren, are you familiar with the idea of prior restraint?
Elaborate.
It's a First Amendment thing. It restricts you before you do it.
Yeah, so in most cases of prior restraint, we both agree, right? Most of those are going to be wildly unconstitutional. This falls under prior restraint.
No, it's not the same thing. You're talking about...
It is prior restraint.
You're talking about school curriculum for children. They have a large amount of latitude to control what that is.
It absolutely is the case this falls under prior restraint. So anytime you prohibit speech before the speech happens, that'd be an example of prior restraint. This absolutely does that.
Prior restraint's unconstitutional?
I just told you that there's not all of it's that unconstitutional. You have to give a reason, a justification.
The burden is on you. Involved in it. Do you know what
the reason on you?
Hold on. You
mean the 3 types?
You have to corner Lauren on prior restraint. Do you know the 3 factors that are involved in that?
Sure. Are you asking the 3 types of ways in which prior restraint can be allowed or restricted? Right? Are you talking about in the case of the license speech or judicial injunction or the outright prohibition of speech? Is this what you're talking about?
The types of restrictions. What do they usually say?
Are those what you were saying? Those 3 types that I just mentioned?
No, it's called time, place, and manner restrictions.
You would be talking about the types that I just mentioned then.
Yeah, it's called time, place, and manner.
Okay, so I got it right. Nice.
When you're talking about children in schools and the curriculum, that shit's allowed. You have a large amount of latitude, the legislature, the parents, to control the curriculum in the classroom and what's talked about.
Excuse me, prior restraint. Teachers should be allowed to say the N-word in class, otherwise it's prior restraint.
No. There's a wild difference between legally prohibiting teachers from blasting ins in the classroom and saying something like, hey, if you blast ins, you'll be fired. You can't arrest a teacher for saying the N-word.
Right.
You could fire them, though.
Yeah.
You can't arrest them. You can't prosecute them.
We're not talking about arresting anybody here.
Yes, we are. That's what the bill does.
Where's the criminal section in the bill?
There's not a criminal section in the bill. The bill prohibits things on a legal basis. These are legal restraints. These are not firing teachers.
Hold on. Wait. We just talked about. You said when I brought up arrests, you said that's in the bill. Where is it in the bill that they arrest the teachers for this?
I'm looking at the bill right now. I'm trying to.
So the bill itself does not specify an arrest, right? The bill itself does not legally specify arrest. The bill is a legal bill. I'm aware. The bill itself is, however, law. It's law, and thus the First Amendment applies to it. It does not apply to employment.
After every time we make something illegal, now we have to write, "You will be arrested if you break the law" under it in little crayon.
From my understanding, government agents in general, people who work for the government don't have full free speech. There are plenty of restrictions on their speech in every aspect of government jobs. Am I wrong there? Or can, people that work for the government just say whatever the hell they want, whenever they want, while working?
I think that the only legal restrictions are going to be sensitive information restrictions, right? Like security restrictions. Other than that, I think that it's all just, if you could find me a law that was otherwise, I'm pretty sure that it's just...
There can be, in some cases, for the sake of being able to do one's job in a safe environment, they can put restrictions in a workplace, even a government workplace.
For example, if you have classified information, yeah.
Right.
What about the other portions of the bill? Do you guys support the aspect when it involves the health screening or the wellness screening of children? Do you support them notifying parents about that and parents having the right to consent or not consent?
I think you guys are trying to move away from the weakest aspect of the bill and move to one you think defend.
No, you're trying to focus.
Talk about one.
I am trying to focus on the weakest aspect of the bill. You've caught me.
Can you answer that? Just you could even do a quick yes or no if you want to. I think we're allowed to ask about the bill in general.
Before we move on to that, can we talk about the specific line we were on before you guys pivot away?
We can get back to it. How about that?
Yeah, he just wants a quick yes or no, and then we'll go back right onto that.
Sure. Quick yes or no. Yeah, I disagree with the other aspects of the bill as well. So in the case of this restriction on speech, it's not that interesting. In the case of the specific restrictions on speech here, I think these are wildly ridiculous restrictions that are completely impractical. The arguments you've given so far have been biting some of the most absurd bullets. A teacher should never be able to talk about marriage in the classroom. Or teachers should never be able to talk about gender identity. If a teacher walks into a classroom, what even qualifies as talking about gender identity? If you say I am a girl or I am a boy, is that talking about gender identity?
Sure. So that's not exact. So, wait, did you just pivot back to the point, or that was with respect to my point?
There's no such thing as pivoting back to a point. I'm staying on the point.
Oh my god!
What do you think a pivot is?
Point that brought up. Did you go away from that back?
You said we could just go back. You just said we could go back to it.
Lauren said,
idiot. Asking. Can you?
Lauren, I'm gonna make it really clear to you. Lauren was out loud saying just a quick yes or no. And then I give a quick yes or no, and I talk about the point.
You, if you could just say, yeah, that's what I'm doing. I'm like, oh, okay. Because I wanted to understand.
Ignore what I just said?
He is going back to the previous topic.
I'm staying on topic. You caught me. I'm staying on topic.
Yeah, well, I was trying
tricky debate bro tactic of staying on topic.
And this is an aspect of the bill. I was asking if you support that aspect of the bill.
Let's go down the logic of one line at a time, and then you can pivot to wherever you want.
I don't understand why you're saying no.
No, we can really easily get into it, right? We're gonna, if you really want to, we can talk about that. But we want to go down as this line. We want to go down. What we want to go down first is we want to go down this line where we have plenty of time to talk about that, right? I don't think Lauren Sutton's going to kick us off.
Yeah, okay. We can keep going down. We can keep going down this sexual orientation and identity thing. But I think there are some big pieces of just bullshit that have been put out there that need to be corrected.
Which pieces?
The fact that this bill is civil, not criminal. This is a super chat I got from someone, which is very relevant, and Nuance Bro tried to make this point. So if teachers violate it, then that is potential grounds for termination, and maybe the school can be sued, but not teachers getting arrested for saying, ooh, I got married this weekend. That's not going to happen. And portraying it that way is a complete fabrication on your end. So I just want to put that out there. You have the floor now.
Sure. So in the case of the specific bill here, the classroom instruction aspect of it, in which you are, the specific text of the bill is from 97 and 101, classroom instruction by school personnel or third parties on sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur, blanket ban effectively, in kindergarten through grade 3, Or, so outside of that context of kindergarten through, outside of K through 3, it's in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards. This is so incredibly ambiguous that it could apply to so many things. I don't think either of you could really address the point that I just made earlier, which is in regards to these, like, what is not, like, what qualifies as, like, about gender identity is, like, saying you're a man or a woman about gender identity.
I would agree that there is ambiguity, and that's probably a problem in the writing of the bill. But what I'm less interested in talking about where potential ambiguity could be than I am on our actual personal moral values around the subjects this bill surrounds. Like, do you think, in general, aside from the bill, do you think that kids in kindergarten should be being taught about sex?
Nobody wants to teach them about sex. Nobody wants to teach them about sex.
They're not having sex ed in K through 3.
Okay, so you don't. Would you want that?
Identity?
Wait, no,
No.
We already do. No, we already do teach them about gender identity.
You guys disagree. One's saying no.
No. We're saying no and yes to different questions. So you asked a different question, Nuance Bro, than Lauren did. The question I was saying no to was we don't already teach about those, or we don't already teach about sex. We don't teach through K through 3
so no
sex.
sex.
And the thing that Phenomenon was saying yes to was gender identity, right?
With gender identity,
we already do teach about this.
we talk about girls and boys all the time in kindergarten through 3rd grade.
That's sex, though.
No.
Yes.
So you think we teach about sex?
No, we don't teach it.
Male sex and female sex.
No, I don't think we teach about penises and vagina in K through 3. I could be wrong.
Talking about that.
No,
That's what sex is, though, right?
No, those are body parts. That's not what
Yes.
sex.
So what is sex then?
Saying sex as in the two sexes.
Yeah. What are those?
The bimodal distribution
Female
of
and
sex.
male.
Okay. How do you decide if somebody's male or female, Nuance Bro?
We know based on those sexual characteristics and their chromosomes.
Do we test
parts?
kids' chromosomes?
Wait,
Yes,
hold on. Like body parts?
The body parts can inform if someone's male or male.
Huh.
I'm sorry, male or female, but that doesn't mean body parts are sex. You understand the distinction there, right?
The distinction that you're making is that body parts are all that decides sex. It's a bunch of different body
I said
parts.
that and chromosomes.
That's a body
It's a body part.
Allosomes would be a body part.
Hold on. Chromosomes are a body part. You would
Do you think they outside of your body? Where do you think they are, Nuance Bro?
That is like unbelievably bad faith. That is like.
Sorry, I don't want to hear bad faith accusations. I don't want to hear bad faith accusations from either of you at this point.
When he says body part, we're talking about limbs and shit. Not, the atom, like the air in your body, the water is in your body, so it is a body part. Like, unbelievable.
Unbelievable bad faith. It's not semantics.
No, because he made the full claim that body parts don't. He said parts with an S, right? He said with an S plural. He was talking about body parts. When we were talking about body parts do determine sex. That was a ridiculous claim to make. So we were countering the specific claim made.
Yeah, I've never heard of chromosomes described as a body part.
Hey, Nuance Bro,
body
part. Which part of the body on a woman are you most attracted to? It's the atoms for me on a man. I love that body part of a man.
I love the ribosomes.
We're the ones being bad faith here, by the way. The people who've addressed zero arguments so far are accusing the other people of being like.
I love it when it's a smooth.
Say again. Say again.
The smooth ER. Yeah.
So back to the actual contention, like accusing us of being bad faith and like addressing none of our arguments here. The actual contention, the actual bill we're talking about. If we say that the bill includes the idea, you said it's ambiguous, and you want to talk about the moral principles. For you, when you say gender identity, what do you mean? What are you referring to? What are we banning talking about?
If you want to sit there and talk about this is how I identify as a female, this is how I identify as a male, this is how, when they talk about gender identity, they are clearly talking about the idea that you can decide and shift your gender identity and how you express that. I don't think these are conversations. Kids are still trying to figure out the gender they were born with when they're 6, 7, let alone the idea that you could potentially shift this. I don't think these are conversations that kindergarten children can even conceptualize.
So your definition is just talking about transgender people then, right?
That's one aspect of it for sure. Like,
What's
it's
the other
undeniable
aspect,
that
then?
This is referring to people that can potentially shift their gender identity.
So what's the rest of it then? Because that's the only thing you just described. And on the fact of like children not being able to know, it does seem that there's a lot of factors that trans people at a very, very young age can be aware of their gender and be accurate for long term.
You can be aware of a lot of things at a certain age, but your ability to process them properly and in a decision-making manner, like our decision-making skills as humans are not fully developed until we are 25 years old. And the gap between someone in high school...
Sure, which is why the detransition rate
extreme.
for children is going to be a little bit higher than the detransition rate for people who transition as adults, but it's still, all of it's going to be well below 1%, right? It's still all going to be like in the point...
Did you just say the detrans rate for children is less than 1%? You're not...
Yeah, it's absolutely. It's actually, the detrans rate in general is 1 in 3,000. The detrans rate for children, I think, is close to 0.1. I can find you a source on that pretty easily.
Untrue. This is completely untrue, because what you are referring to as detrans, you are talking about people who are, physically changing into the other gender, which is a very minute percentage of children. Now, when we talk about children who think they are transgender and then decide they're not anymore, that rate is extremely high.
You're talking about the rates that are generally, yeah, I know the study you're referring to. I'm assuming you're talking about the...
So children who think they are transgender and then decide they're not after puberty is extremely high.
The only study I've seen which shows the numbers that I'm assuming you're going to say, which are going to be the high numbers of rates of detransition, include children who went to gender clinics for gender non-conformity, not children who actually identified as the other gender.
Right, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying when you say it's 1%, you're referring to...
So you're just talking about anybody who's referred to a gender clinic for gender nonconformity, regardless of how the child thinks they identify. No, not young kids who have questions about their gender. Young kids who are gender nonconforming, who their parents refer them to a gender clinic.
Okay, so that's even more extreme then. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, those kids tend to desist after puberty.
Yeah, what do you think gender nonconforming means? Like literally, not that they identify as gender nonconforming, as in they like play with boys' toys if they're a girl, or if they're AFAB or whatever.
So you're saying they go to a gender clinic because they picked up a truck?
That's
he was referring to.
No, okay, we can look at it, right?
A truck?
It'll be typically parents are going to see more signs than that, but it's all going to be parents, right? No kid.
Sends their child to a gender clinic because they decided to play with the other kid's toys.
So I was being a little bit hyperbolic to make a point. Obviously, it's not going to be literally like one instance of them playing with another kid's toys, right? It's usually going to be persistent actions that are gonna match with the other gender. But whether that just be like tomboyish behavior for a girl, or whether that be wanting to wear clothes of the other gender, whatever, they'll be referred to gender clinics by their parents. It doesn't matter how these kids identify. It's about the things that they do. Them experimenting at this age makes a ton of sense, right? The fact that they're going to be referred to gender clinics, that parents are going to see signs of transgenderism when kids don't know shit about gender and they're exploring everything, makes a lot of sense that they would have that referral. And it also makes sense that they would be desisted a lot. They don't know.
Do the Ketanji Brown Jackson thing where we get into the definitions of like what
where they're exploring. Yeah.
Sorry, Lauren. Did you say you don't know shit about gender? Or is that
No. Kids.
Are you guys going
to
to define
the term? It doesn't matter to them.
That's kids don't know anything about gender.
I guess
it doesn't.
not.
At that age, it doesn't matter when it comes to actual sexual attraction, and when it comes to like the gender, specifically like, a gender identity, that I identify as this or that gender. That stuff does not matter to kids, and it's too much for them at that age. Like,
trans kids, it does matter, though, right?
They're probably only that because they've had this shit imposed on them. I don't think you can really.
Do you have any actual proof for that, or you just make it up?
Source.
Yeah, unironically.
I didn't just
Are people
make
serious?
that, but we are seeing like unbelievable.
I'm sorry, we're the ones who are bad faith here. You caught us.
Do you remember being 7 years old? Do you remember ever thinking about like sexual attraction to other kids around
Okay, so
like 6 years old?
So hold on. Sexual attraction and gender identity again. Stop moving the goalpost with the sexual attraction. You can't conflate these two.
They're in the same sentence when we talk about.
They're in the same sentence, but they're two very different
about
topics.
Gender identity. Oh, okay. Do you remember being 6 and 7 and thinking you were a fucking lizard? Like that was all of us. Do you remember thinking you had superpowers? Do you remember thinking a kid's gender identity doesn't matter?
Did you think you were a boy,
They
Lauren?
can't discern. Of course, I thought I was a boy when I was a kid. Sometimes every kid thinks they are something that they're not all the time when they are a child. This is why their opinion on this is not.
Nuance, bro. Did you think when you were 7 years old? Did you ever think you were a girl?
I don't remember all the things that I thought when I was 7, but I do remember I thought I had cancer because I heard about cancer a lot, and I was like, I must have cancer.
Yes, that was
but did you think you were? Do you think you were a girl?
I don't remember that much.
You know what? If he heard that he could potentially be a girl, he probably would have thought about that too. Because that's how kids' brains work, and denying that is crazy. Like, I know you guys just said it's like bad faith of me to say they're probably thinking this
because
because they were told about.
Teachers like telling me about trans stuff and like you could be a girl, you could be non-binary. Like I didn't have that, even though I grew up in San Francisco. It didn't really. Teachers didn't talk.
Lauren, I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't think I don't think most young girls ever think they're a boy when they're 7 years old. Nuance, bro.
A lot of young kids are like, "What would it be like to be
probably
a boy or
do
a girl?"
now.
But they think it in a very innocent way.
That's such a very different thought.
They don't think it in a way that
adults think those thoughts.
Drastic now between like the Gen Zers identifying as LGBTQ at 20.8% versus the older generation who lives in the same time period.
Probably social acceptance for homosexuality, which has been persistent throughout human culture since like the beginning of time.
Right now, and those older people live right now at the
they
same
were
time
they were raised and had their sexual development occur at a time when it wasn't, right?
Yeah, and now we have teachers like basically grooming children in the society. They're on TikTok and then talking about non-binary stuff.
What do you where were you getting this grooming claim? Wait! I want you to. Where's the grooming claim? You said that there's teachers grooming.
Gay pride parades in elementary schools. I think that's a problem.
There's gay pride parades in elementary.
Yes, there's a whole fucking video about it. Actually,
that sounds really funny.
Yeah,
that sounds really funny to watch.
So you think it's funny? You don't think it's a problem? Is what you're saying?
No,
its existence now. It's funny. So
well, slow down, bud.
Yeah,
I'm going too fast.
So the
No. There's a really important point that needs to be highlighted here. Is you guys said I was bad faith and ridiculous to suggest that kids were probably thinking they were transgender when they were in kindergarten now because they had been told about it by their teachers, and now you just admitted the reason there are probably more trans kids today.
I said more LGBT plus kids, right? I think that that a lot of people have homosexual attraction.
Wait. No,
yeah, so
in the LGBT.
I don't think that trans people have increased at that rate. I think that the trans people have only increased at the rate that I don't think that trans people have increased at all. I think that trans people being out in public has increased. But I think the same is probably true for homosexuality.
So you think there were a bunch of trans?
You think it's natural for like 20.8% of the population to be LGBTQ? You think that's?
I think
that's the natural. If
we look at our
accepting and all that,
if we look at our closest genetic relatives, bonobos, they're all pansexual. If we look at like throughout human history, homosexual behavior has been really common.
I'm gonna do the head.
Oh man, the exasperated.
Just don't criticize me for it, you know.
Okay. No, like, yeah, I think that I don't think that all humans or even most humans are necessarily going to have like a homosexual attraction, but I think that that like up to like somewhere between like 20 to 60 is probably like a reasonable guess.
Bonobos pansexual.
How are bonobos pansexual? They have sex with boy bonobos, they have sex with girl bonobos, they have sex with intersex bonobos. They just have sex. They just be bonoboing.
So they're animals.
No, not all animals are pansexual like bonobos. Bonobos just have a lot of sex.
Okay. Maybe Lauren was asking, are bonobos animals?
Yes.
They're a type of animal.
These are the good faith discussions we're trying to have here.
I agree.
Well, yeah, it's really difficult to like push through how much bad faith you guys throw out there, because you've yet to address any of our arguments.
Yeah, I mean, I could say the same thing about you.
You actually couldn't. Maybe you could possibly say it. I'd just be wrong.
With respect to the bill, you
You'd be
shifted
wrong.
it to what we were previously talking about.
Whoa,
And
the
then,
bad faith tactic of
asked you
not
what is-
pivoting.
No, well, it is pivoting, but you also didn't answer when I asked what is a woman. Didn't answer that question.
When did you ask that? We can answer that really easily.
I'd love to
you
answer that
did ask
question.
it.
Please.
Sure. So yeah, the reason we didn't, probably the reason that we didn't answer that question is because we didn't hear it. It's a really easy question to answer. We think that a woman is somebody who identifies with a certain female social archetype.
What is a
A
wait?
certain female social archetype.
Yeah, exactly. So what we see in society, right? I understand it's complicated, but there is like a sort of like archetype of what we consider to be like a sort of like feminine, like a thing we imagine, right? And like a masculine sort of thing we imagine. When somebody has like gender dysphoria, it's very likely that this person, because of that dysphoria, will then identify with like say that feminine social archetype as opposed to like a masculine one if they're like a trans woman, for example. Basically what you hear sometimes is a woman is somebody who identifies as a woman, right? This is just a more philosophical, nerdy definition, so that for the extra clarity.
So that it doesn't like reference itself.
Exactly, yeah.
And by female, you're talking about biological female.
I'm talking about like a general trend of associations that we have that like biological females are more likely to have.
More like the aesthetic of femininity in
Yeah,
a
but what is
social
female?
sense.
Yeah.
No, but when you said a woman who identifies with certain social aspects of a female or characteristics of a female, by female,
With the social aspects of femininity.
Female.
No, just the social things that we associate with femininity.
no, hold on. You're talking about a biological female, is what you're saying.
So it's the associations we have, right? Not the biological female itself. It's not a woman is not somebody who's a biological female, right?
No, I'm
We have a bunch
not
of
saying that's what
we
you're
have a bunch
saying.
of
I'm saying when you use the word female,
we have a bunch of
you're talking-
association. Oh my God, we have a bunch of associations, right, with what a biological female acts and does and behaves
Yes,
like, right?
That's what I'm saying. When you use the word female, you're talking about biological female, correct?
I've said biological female like 80 times
That's
now.
not what you said the first time. I don't think you said biological female the first time you used
Probably
the
didn't
word
say it the
female.
first time. When I say female, I'm referring to biological female.
Okay, that's
what that means.
all I was asking. Okay,
And I answered it like 8 times.
sure. But when you talk about the characteristics or aspects associated with a female, biological female, is this up to every individual's interpretation of what that is?
What do you mean?
So if someone identifies as a woman, but they could they could still wear like blue jeans and like bench 350. And,
Yeah, they could, yeah.
Drink beer and not paint their nails, and that's
Yeah,
still.
sure.
But how is that identifying with like the
female
characteristics
archetype,
of
yeah.
Do you understand the difference between like an identity and like an action?
Sure.
Okay, so you could identify, right, as like a debate bro, right? But that doesn't mean you have to like say Gish Gallop, right? For example.
Sure. But
Okay.
I'd
You can still
probably have to, if I identified as a debate bro, I'd probably have to do things that debate bros do.
Yeah, that would add up.
Like,
Otherwise, you're just
one of which
calling yourself something that you aren't.
Wait, so Lauren, if I asked you like what is a Lauren? What is somebody who's Lauren, right? We'd say somebody whose name is Lauren, right?
It's a name. Lauren is a name. Yeah.
Yeah, Lauren is a name. And so a Lauren is somebody whose name is Lauren, right? What does a Lauren have to do?
Yes, but Lauren isn't a social category.
Yes, it is.
comparing-
Objective. Yeah, of course it is.
It's a word.
No. Comparing a person's name that can be applied to various different groups. It's not a grouping. I mean, it's.
Yes, it is.
But it's not a specific. It's not as specific as woman or man, right? It's just like.
It's less specific. It's more specific.
Almost,
Sorry.
You can call anything a Lauren. You can call a stuffy a Lauren. You can call things that aren't human a Lauren. You can't call.
In this case, I think the context was pretty clear. We're talking about a Lauren Southern right now.
Okay, whatever. Continue.
I'm sorry, do you have like a response?
I'm sorry, how is this analogous to something like woman, which deals with, like you said, it's someone who identifies with the, aspects of a biological female. How is a Lauren associated?
Wait, can someone identify as Lauren Southern and be me?
You won't be you, But somebody could identify as Lauren and be Lauren because it's a name.
But they won't be
name's
me,
word.
right? So they can't
It won't
be
be
Lauren
you.
Southern.
Yeah, but
It
that
wouldn't be
has nothing
this
to
Lauren
do with,
Southern. I agree, right?
It has nothing to
It would
do
be
with
Lauren.
like, biological reality.
Oh my God.
You literally use, when you're talking about woman, you actually referenced a biological reality of a female.
Okay.
True.
And so what
Because there's a social
what does a name have to do?
Trying my best.
My whole chat are Lauren.
and there's a biological reality of a human that we call Lauren Southern, right? Is there a biological human that we call Lauren Southern?
What is a fucking
Wait, nuance. It's
name
nuance.
to do with, like,
Nuance.
Go ahead.
Is Lauren Southern a human being that we give a name, the name Lauren to, a real biological reality of a human being?
I don't know.
My whole
Question
chat
that
are
from
Lauren
time to time.
now.
That's great. I'm glad that we're all Lauren now.
We are all Lauren.
For the
Everyone
sake
here.
of
We're
argument, I
all
will
Lauren.
accept that Lauren is
Lauren,
a person.
do it. Lauren bro. We got Lauren bro over here. What do you want to say?
Yes.
So the idea is that that there are certain social roles that we associate with female, but we don't say that cis women have to meet those social roles or they don't have to perform every aspect of those social roles to be women, right? If a cis woman was doing all the things you just described, you wouldn't stop describing them as a woman. Identity seems to give the most benefit as a categorical label. So identity seems to be the best way to classify these
But
things.
what does that have to do with a name? Like, how is that
Yeah,
analogous?
person's
So a name is another category.
Label.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
What are the expectations
same
upon
kind.
someone who has a name?
It's a different kind, but it is a categorical.
What is it? What is it? Can you explain the expectations?
What's the?
That
Sure,
they
what-
have the name Lauren. That's it.
It's not
Lauren
that they
is someone with the name Lauren. Like,
What are the
Wait,
expectations?
holy shit! Let us answer. Fuck.
Answer, please.
I'd love to. So the expectations you're asking for a woman or for a Lauren?
Lauren.
Sure. So the expectations for somebody who's Lauren, we have a general expectation, I think, for this person to be like to be a woman, right? We have a general expectation, actually, of a lot of the same ones that we'd have for the same ones we'd have for a female, right? We'd assume that Lauren is a very feminine name, so we'd assume this is going to be a feminine person, not a very masculine person. It would be really weird if you
those are
were
assumptions,
called
not
Lauren.
expectations.
These are
That's what an
That's-
expectation is. I'm
No,
sorry,
you're
you have
not.
to explain
Expectation-
things.
What is an assumption? Wait, can you tell me what an assumption is?
So, like, if you're categorizing something as a human, it has to be a certain variety of things.
Lauren, what is an
Lauren,
assumption?
you're saying it could be this. We assume this, but what is the categorical? Like, if you are Lauren, you have to have this thing.
Lauren, why won't you
If
tell me
you're
what an
a
assumption
table,
is?
You have to be an object that is not living, that typically has 4 legs, but there
Okay.
are some categorical items that you have to fall under.
Lauren, so an assumption, right? Here's the definition of an assumption. A thing that is accepted as true or is as certain to happen without proof. Does that sound like an accurate definition?
But to be a Lauren, you don't have to be a woman.
Can you answer that question? Does it sound like an accurate definition?
Sure, but that's
What if I told you that was the definition for expectation?
Okay, fine. Well, then what is what?
What if I told you the fact you didn't know I was lying about that proves that there's no fucking difference in the words? Devil all. I got it with a devil all.
I feel like you think you got an own there, but
That was
like
a
no
big
no
own.
one understands what the fuck you're talking about. That's why
I'm saying
right?
assumption and expectation they mean the same thing. They are synonyms.
I heard the
What?
closer
Okay.
you get to your mic and the faster you talk, the more right you are.
I hear that the less arguments you have in response to the things I say, the more wrong you are.
That's right. If you talk faster
Gotcha.
and you get closer and you
Sin.
go like,
Where's your counter argument?
what's your kind of argument?
He's like raging out and not addressing the argument. Like
I don't even. It doesn't make
This
sense.
was
Like the whole name thing tied to like what a woman is and referencing biology in that definition.
Whoa.
It makes no sense. I'm pretty sure. I feel safe saying most people are like, "What the fuck are you even talking about?" When you bring up, the
You have to have like a
expectation of
belt
name.
standard to your
Let's
brain to
not
not
use
understand
let's
this.
not use the word expectation because he's using that to try to semantics his way out of actually giving definitions.
Sorry, what definition do you want?
So what do you have to have as a quality to be a Lauren? What do you have to have as a quality?
What is necessary as a quality would just
Yes.
be identifying as Lauren.
Right. So what is necessary as a quality to be a woman?
Identifying as a woman. I already answered this question.
Okay. So Nuance Bro, there we go. He says
Sorry,
you just have to identify as a
Whoa,
woman.
hold on. You were accusing me of semanticsing away from the definition there. The definition I had already given you.
Oh,
we're the bad faith one, really.
The definition actually is like, because first you read
I didn't.
female, which is biology, and then you said a
I
woman.
said
is someone that
identifying
identifies as a woman.
I said identifying as a certain social archetype, right? For the female social archetype, then I specified, even clarified immediately after. What we usually say, and that's the more like nerdy philosophical version, what we usually say is a much simpler version that means the exact same thing, which is a woman is somebody who identifies as a woman. So we did give you this definition. It's been said several times during this conversation.
But again, you can't
in both forms.
Because
a woman
yes,
is someone
in both
who's
forms.
the
that.
actual word itself that we're asking you to define. You can't use that.
He's trying.
Oh my, that's the why we use this.
Trying to say
Take
that
the
woman
belt
and
sander
men-
off your brain. Like, are you serious?
Continue
That's the
to relax.
point. That's why I
Fine.
gave you both of them.
He's trying to say that words like woman and man are as arbitrary as names. Like that they're just something you decide to have and they don't actually define anything except what you've decided.
Is that what you guys are saying?
That's
That's
all
what it
words.
sounds like.
That's all words.
That's every
We
word.
pick words based on what the most useful way to call it. We pick words based on how useful it is to define it that way.
I mean, I just don't even see where, when you try to have these debates and discussions, you usually try to find common ground. But if we're just going to deny reality and say
What reality are we
name
denying?
that you're given, just an arbitrary ass name, whatever, it's just individual signifier or something, that's effectively the same as what
Who said that?
gender is.
Who said that?
Wait,
We didn't say it's effectively the same. We said that there's an analogous sort of aspect that isn't the aspect that you just said, right? The aspect isn't the part that you're just analog. Okay,
oh,
so
All right. We're trying to explain, like, entry level, like, philosophy 101, philosophy of language shit. Like, this is super simple. We pick words.
I have a sander on my brain. I can't understand.
I've noticed. Hold on. So in the case of the thing we're describing to you, the point is just when we pick a definition for a word, we pick it based on what's useful. There's not some true platonic ideal of the word that we pick out. There's not a central word authority. The words don't come down from God. We just pick them out. They're just words, right? And when we pick out a word, like a name, for example, right? We pick it out based on what's the most useful way to describe that. And in the case of a name, the most useful way to describe a Lauren is somebody who identifies as a Lauren. The most useful way to describe a woman is somebody who identifies as a woman. And when you ask us, you can't use the word in its definition, that's why we give you the more nerdy philosophical version, which is
I disagree with that.
You disagree with the definition?
No, so here's what I don't think that woman is just a word that's as arbitrary as a name that's used to signify an individual person.
every word is that. The point is that every word is that arbitrary.
It clearly
No, they
isn't
have like
if
real
people
meanings
are-
behind them. Woman
Yeah.
has a real meaning.
What's the real meaning behind woman? Tell me.
female?
What's the real meaning behind female?
You.
The same, probably.
Do you notice that all of these words?
The definition of female.
Probably, but what we're going to go down on this path is what we're going to go down to. All words are going to be defined by words, right? So all words are just words that we're making up for shit. So every word is going to be arbitrarily determined based on...
Most ridiculous argument I've ever heard.
That-
All words, because we have language, and language is not...
Because language is made up. Because language is made up, we can make it up however we want. That's the argument. It's that simple.
Things that matter.
Yeah, like identity. Identity is a real thing that matters.
If it's just a word, why does it matter so much
is
to
a real
trans
thing
women
that
if
matters.
they're called
and
women?
a name is
Like,
a
why does
unique
it matter?
signifier. These are different things, and they're not all just...
Lauren, I couldn't hear you.
Because words are made up, everything's made up, it's all arbitrary, it's the same. No, that seems pretty ridiculous.
I'm not going to go back and forth on the same point 35 times with Nuance because he just can't understand it. What'd you say, Lauren? I couldn't hear you. Nuance interrupted you.
I guess
It's just
I
a
don't
word with
understand.
no meaning. Like, why even have gender in your world? Why does it matter so much to trans people that they're called woman and that they're perceived in a certain way if it's just a word with no meaning behind it?
I never said it was just a word with no meaning. I said it was a word that we can ascribe all sorts of different meanings to. I think that this meaning of the word provides more validation to trans people and has generally more social utility. But I think any word can be arbitrarily defined based on how useful it is to define that word that way.
Can you do that for uranium?
Yeah, it's most useful to find uranium as the what is it? I-25.
You're saying useful, but could you really just define it as anything because it's a word? We just...
You could define it.
Could you define
Yeah,
it
you
as,
could.
like,
You technically could. It wouldn't be very useful.
Could you define it as this rubber ducky right here?
You could if you wanted to. It wouldn't be very useful, though, right?
Fucking stupid. That's
It wouldn't be very useful.
This is
That wouldn't be very
like-
exactly because it wouldn't be useful to do, right? Because nobody would do something so stupid. Because somebody wouldn't do something so useless. I agree.
No, it's
So
not
I
real.
think- no,
You
I think-
can't do that. It's not.
I don't.
Like, no, you
I'm so glad.
technically could call your rubber ducky
You could be
uranium,
wrong.
but it would
Yeah,
just,
you could be wrong.
If I name my, hold on, really quick, Nuance Bro. If I name my rubber ducky, like if I name it, I name it Lauren. Is it wrong to call it Lauren? Is it incorrect?
No, because it's a name.
Perfect. If I call
Uranium.
it uranium,
Uranium's
if I
not,
name it uranium,
When we talk about uranium, the actual element,
It's
that's
a name.
Oh, you just gave it a definition, didn't you? You just
uranium, but that
you just
doesn't make them uranium. You understand?
you just gave a definition to what uranium is, right? By saying it's the actual element. So you give it a different definition in that situation. It's almost like it was more useful to define uranium as the name and as the rubber ducky when we had it as the name, but it's also more useful to define it as the element when it's the element. And in most cases, it's going to be more useful to define it as the element.
Call the person uranium
Can I
as
ask
their
a
name,
question?
they're not the element. When you call someone, okay, a woman, like, okay, you're identifying.
Lauren,
you are not.
Nuance is going to say the exact same thing he's been saying 35 times over. Can you say what you want to say, Lauren?
Oh well, this is. This is
so
like
how
the
would
craziest
you-
thing I've ever heard.
What do you feel about the fact, like, so I understand when you're talking about, like, social utility of words, like, definitions and words can be fluid to a degree, but it's almost majority rules for how useful a word is. So even, like, the word gender and sex, feminine, masculine, these have been changed by feminists in particular, who wanted, social roles of genders to be separate from biological sex. So feminists really pushed for, like, ideas of masculinity and femininity and gender to be separate. Now that's kind of changing with, like, the transgender push. But I understand what you're saying, where definitions of words can change over time. Currently, today, if you polled the entire world, not just Twitch, not just a high school in a first world country, the vast majority of the world would say the social utility of the word woman is a biological female.
Why would you poll to the average? Why would you poll the general population? You're going to be talking about the local culture in which you're using the word, right? And also, what
The
people?
world is not Twitch, and it's not a high school classroom.
the world doesn't speak English.
You're only going to be talking about the people who you're communicating with. That's all we care about is the people that we're communicating with. You wouldn't care about how somebody in Australia uses, or not even Australia, because Australia is going to have overlap with
Right.
American.
You're right, which is why we try to have some. We try to ensure there's some conformity in language we use, which is why when people use language incorrectly, we usually look at them like they're an idiot. We correct them. We try to ensure that the groups around us use language correctly. Now there's a poll going on.
So
There's a
I
poll
agree.
from Twitch to say the word woman should mean one thing, and a push and a pull from the general population to say it should mean what it has meant for the last hundreds of years, right? So you guys are on the poll side of saying woman should mean this. It doesn't mean anything. We can define it how we want, but the majority don't agree with that. So right now, the social utility, you are going against the social utility of the word.
So that's not really what the word utility means, right? Utility isn't just the most communication. There's a lot of things that we can get utility out of other than just communication, right? A word can also have utility for in the sense that it can provide validation, that it can have less. That it can provide more specific categories, that it can be more distinguishing. That there's a lot, that is communication. But that it can. That the word can sound nicer, that the word can be easier to say. That's another big thing is words have we've often changed words because we want, like, newt, for example, used to be anute, but we've shortened it to just newt, which means that it's, like, easier to say. And there's lots of reasons which we would change the definition of a word or the word itself to match a utility that aren't just speaking more clearly and giving more context to a situation or to having a more specific definition.
Nuance Bro is so frustrated right now because he is using the general use of the word woman. Like you said,
No, he's not.
Words are only useful if you're using them in the way that the population use them. And the majority of the population, wherever you are, will say that woman means
That's not
biological
true.
female. You just because you're on Twitch,
Not
I think
you. Okay.
But
I actually have just direct data on this. Lauren, when we talk about like women's and men's bathroom, right? We'd agree that these would be a pretty reasonable reflection of how people view like who is a woman and who is a man, is who can go into which bathroom, right?
no, because I think that some people would say that trans women can go into women's bathrooms, but as you've acknowledged at the beginning of this, a trans woman is different from a woman.
no.
Well, no, we didn't actually acknowledge that, and you didn't either because you just called them.
did say that at the beginning when I
different than
was
cis women.
saying you
They're different
when
than
we
cis
were,
women.
no. Yeah.
We said they were different than cis.
A better question would be if you asked people globally, can men bear children?
Do you have data on
Most of them
that?
would say no.
Why would you ask?
Data on that?
Would I what?
Do you have data on that, or do you just make it up?
Why would you ask globally? She said her specific claim.
Obviously,
Her specific claim was that no matter where you are, right?
Political
It's so obvious that in a city like San Francisco or Denver, and I know because I've been in these cities.
Oh no, believe me, I was born and raised in San Francisco.
Exactly. When the definition's probably going to be more like woman is somebody who identifies as woman, right? That's probably going to be what most people in San Francisco are going to tell you.
Imagine.
Right. So Lauren, yeah. So even Nuance agrees. Lauren, your claim that nobody.
San Francisco, that's not represented.
That's what Lauren's claim was. Nowhere. It doesn't matter where was Lauren's claim.
Oh no, I disagree. I think if you go to like Harvard or like some like 95% voting for Democrat campus, like they're definitely gonna.
But I
So
said it
Nuance,
doesn't matter where. I meant by country. I literally just said earlier Twitch. If you go to Twitch, of course, their definition is going to be different. So there are
Twitch is a country?
little subsections. No, you're not understanding. I said you can go anywhere. I was talking about countries, but there are places within countries, small subsections like Twitch, like San Francisco, where you will get a different definition, but it's not particularly useful to use when you're talking to a general average person, when you're online talking to,
This is pretty semantic and off the point. I agree. What's useful about it is that most people, even if they use one definition or the other, most people are aware that both definitions are in societal use, right? Most people are aware that some people use woman to mean people who identify as women.
Maybe in a Western conversation, I'd say most. But
Sure, we're talking about like the English-speaking world, and especially our country, which is going to be America. And you're in Australia or Canada now?
Canada right now.
Canada, okay. So yeah, exactly. It's going to be in the context that matters. We're talking about we're talking about trans sports, and we're talking about the Don't Say Gay bill in America, and I guess in Canada too. So either way, that's going to be super relevant to hear.
Sure. Okay. I'm gonna wrap this debate. I'm late to get to a gaming thing I was supposed to do. I appreciate you all coming on here and having a mostly civilized discussion, even though we couldn't find much common ground. If we could quickly, I'll just go around the circle. I'll start with Nuance Bro for once, since I didn't do that throughout the debate. Nuance Bro, could you give your final thoughts and shout out where people can find you?
Final thoughts. Man, what can you even say? It was quite the lively discussion. I feel like there's team reality and team everything's made up. The points don't matter. Whose line is it anyway? And maybe the other side might have a disagreement on whose side that is. But yeah, you can check me out, Nuance Bro on YouTube, at Nuance Bro, Twitter, Instagram, all that good stuff. And we're going to be with Lauren at the Better Discourse event in Dallas, April 23rd, I believe it is. So check that out.
All right. Synth.
Sure, yeah, I'm Synth. On YouTube, I'm SINTHD. It's spelled like Sin D. You can find me on YouTube on my own YouTube channel. You can find me on The Crucible, where I'm the in-house left-wing debater. I mostly debate the huge, mostly right-wing audience there. Come check me out.
Cool. And Phenomics.
Hey, twitch.tv/Phenomics, PHENOMIKS. You can also find me on Twitter at Phenomics. We do politics streams. I also am on YouTube as Phenomics, and I'm uploading a couple video essays soon, and we do debates on Twitch.
Great. I always respect people for jumping in the ring, even if I don't agree with them. So thank you both very much. Thank you, Nuance Bro. I will see you in Texas shortly, and